Welcome to House Rule, a podcast about role-playing. You're joining us for episode number 30, approximately. Nice. And I am one of your hosts, Ed, joined by...
Ebo.
I'm Lee.
And this is Jeff.
I'm glad we're up to an approximately even number, like 30. It sounds nice, even though it's
we're getting
a
closer.
lie.
Yeah.
I'm pointing at each of you to intro yourselves, and I'm acutely aware that you cannot tell who I'm pointing at, or that I'm even really pointing.
I know what you're talking about.
We got it.
Internet magic. But we, of course, introduced yourself based on who's the most assertive alpha male, which is obviously why I go first.
I'm fine with that.
So yeah, we're gonna have a little chat, a little chit chat today about role-playing game subjects. Obviously, we were gonna talk about a thorn in all of our sides and some of our paws, which is sort of a sticky situation that happens when you try to introduce new material into a game. And material we mean like published material, possibly other unofficial material, but basically stuff, crunchy stuff that you want to try to add into a game that is already going.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be crunchy stuff either, but that's the main sticking place. Like a new book will come out and hey, there's maybe like a new class or new feats or new skills or something relevant to that game, and somebody or everybody will want to try it, and somebody or everybody will have to make some sort of sacrifice to get there. Either killing their character or making a new one or just changing some stuff around if the GM is okay with that.
I prefer all three.
See, this was a problem for me primarily when we were playing 4, D&D 4 that is, because new books came out at like a breakneck pace. And
really
whenever
did.
a new book would come out, I would be like, oh man, that looks really cool. But I can't play that, and like I'm used to the things that I'm playing already, and the new stuff looks really cool, which kind of makes the stuff that I'm playing now seem less cool. Which
Fourth edition was woefully compartmentalized in that way that it was. There would often be new material for existing classes, but it seldom came in a form lighter than a new build that you would essentially have to alter your character into in order to use, which would change things more than it really seemed right to do.
Yeah, and
it
was kind of like you could get really close. You can get kind of close to the character you want, and then 6 months later a book comes out that is exactly what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, yes.
It does seem weird completely switching your character class, because there's always like some concession in there that you're like, oh, well, that kind of... I would have had this animal companion all along. Well,
sure.
What about that?
That happens to me really, really glaringly in one game where we actually converted it from... I think we either converted it from 3rd edition or we had almost started it in 3rd edition and then decided not to. And I made a character who I had intended to be a bard. And bards didn't exist when 4th edition came out. So I made him into a warlord, which mechanically changed him very, very, very much. And then, we had not been playing it for very long before they released a book that had bard in it.
Yeah.
And so it was like, I think I did wind up changing it again. Changing my concept from... the concept didn't change that much when I changed the class, but it did change some, and it didn't change all the way back properly when I switched it.
Yeah. I don't know, it always seems like jarring, because you can tell when the GM is kind of like shoehorning stuff in to make concessions for that sort of thing, or like even worse, like in fourth, it was like when a new book would come out, it would have like a new source of power. You know, like this is psionic stuff, and this is like this weird naturey stuff, and like never before in your world had you had to consider that there would be psionics in it. And then the book came out, and you're like, well, now someone wants to play Scion, and maybe there's a continent where they practice psionics?
Oh, prestige classes are really exactly that, too.
Yeah, and it's like, you don't have to consider that stuff necessarily before someone is interested in it, and then you have to make a space in your game for it. Which seems really weird to me, and I guess sometimes it's more obvious than other times as a player when a GM has to do that, but it really sucks as a GM, like, when you have to, try to, like, shoehorn something in, but it also sucks to say no to people when they have a really cool idea.
Yeah, like if someone really wants to be part of this new prestige class that came out, I mean, it ruins it a bit because everyone knows that you clearly have not planned for this at all and that you're making it up, and that ruins the immersion a little bit there.
Yeah.
Because you can't have planned for it because it didn't exist. But I don't know.
I think that prestige classes are one of those things that in any game I have played, they have never quite worked the way I think the designers of the game meant for them to work.
How is that, by the way?
Well, the way I think they meant for them to work, and bear in mind this is very subjective, is I think that they meant for them to be like, I don't know, integrated into the story from session 1, and I feel like there should be more gravity from the GM side, like to introduce interesting prestige class options for players to then decide to embark on, which, I don't know, I feel like the ones that mainly got played were the ones that were the most fluff neutral, basically.
Yeah.
The
It's
ones
like an extension of your class.
Yeah, I just want a better set of powers after 6th level than I would have gotten normally, and I don't know. I'm trying to think of good examples of the fluffier ones, but it's been a long time since I've played 3rd edition in a major way.
Or since I've had interest, and like I'm playing a character who's aiming for a prestige class in Jeff's game, but it's one of the ones that was available from the very, very beginning, and B, it is really fluff neutral. Like I'm playing a duelist. I mean, that's more or less an extension of my character concept to just something more specific than it currently is.
Yeah, and I think like some of the core ones are a little heavier on the fluff side. Like I know that the last 3.5 had whatever the Red Wizard as one of the prestige classes listed, I think, which is very Forgotten Realms specific. I remember Purple Dragon Knight was one that came up that I thought was really cool, minus the fluff part, like because my character wasn't in that game world, so it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff can be ported.
I guess
I
feel kind of like as a GM, like if I come up with this group or organization, and if a player takes interest in it and wants to get involved, it would feel weird for me to be like, well, if you really want to be involved, you might want to, unroute your whole character path and do this thing, which might not be what you wanted, or might be crappy abilities you don't actually care about. It's like, do they really need to have class features that let them take advantage of being part of a group, or can they just be part of a group?
Sure, and I think that in some instances, this cropped up, I think, particularly in the 3.5 complete whatever series, and now somewhat in Pathfinder 2 with particularly with the Pathfinder Society-based prestige classes, of which there are several. They will basically give you a couple of ins, like, basically like, this is the type of character from this organization that does this thing. You have your, I don't remember the Pathfinder Society ones except for Chronicler, but they all have like sort of a niche, so you have a number of options. But at the same time, there is, I think, more incentive than ever in Pathfinder specifically to not take a prestige class at all.
Yeah.
To just stay with your core.
I always thought it was kind of weird to, as a player, to ask about running one of the newer ones, like the Red Wizard or the other one that you're talking about, like the Eldori Swordlord.
Sure.
I think is one of the newer ones.
Uh-huh.
Like, well, they're not really integrated into the game, but I really like everything that they do. But
Yeah.
Sure.
And it's like, how do you ask your GM to change, to be like, well, can you shoehorn this in? I think the safest method is to state ahead of time, like, your stance. Like, this is how I feel about new content, or about this sort of stuff. Like, there might not be space for it already in the world, and you're gonna have to live with that.
I mean, until recently, like very recently, I've pretty much had an anything goes type of stance, and
Yeah.
things get out of hand like really quickly. And I don't know how much this would like help with that. We also played with like some pretty ridiculous stats and other stuff like that. But I feel like, the obvious concern of new content that I would be remiss if we did not talk about is like power creep. Like,
Yeah.
for the most part,
Sure.
more options for characters is great. It's fun for everyone. They get the feat that they've always wanted. But as new books come out, I mean, I'm not saying that the developers are actually doing anything scandalous, but it's just sort of natural in that process that the new options are generally better or more
And-
specifically what they wanted.
I would say, like, leaning back on picking on 4th edition for a little while, I think of the way power creep took place in 4th edition as less power creep and more design creep. The design philosophy when the player's handbook was released
yeah.
rapidly evaporated and was replaced with a very similar but completely different design philosophy based around, I would call it, homogeneous classes.
Yeah.
The
And
idea,
focused builds, basically.
the idea of the paladin became almost neutralized until they got the thing where they didn't have to rely on 3 ability scores, unlike all the other classes in the game.
Yeah.
They just took that out, and it's, well, you have a main stat, and then you have one of 2 other stats. You don't need 3 or 4 stats.
And that's mainly what I'm talking about. I think that I might just be crying over Wizards just because I always felt they kind of got a raw deal in 4th, but I feel like they had a similar sort of basically when Wizards were designed, what being a controller meant was different than what it meant the next time they released new classes.
Yeah. The next
And so-
controller was very was different in not just a in a way of their abilities, but like fundamentally.
Right. And so I would say, like, yes, it was more powerful, but it wasn't more powerful for the reason you would expect power creep to happen, which is usually, I think it's usually driven by kind of like a sensationalist attitude where people aren't going to be impressed by something that's worse than what they had before. People aren't usually going to be impressed by something that's different but generally the same. But people will be impressed by something that has wild new possibilities that weren't possible before, and sometimes that just means higher numbers.
Or things that allow you to get rid of this other stuff that you kind of got in your package deal that you don't care about.
Mm-hmm.
Sure,
Trap
absolutely.
Trap finding.
That is that's like the sort of bramble patch that Pathfinder has sown for itself with all these archetypes. It's like there's almost always an archetype that gets rid of just the abilities that you hate
Yeah.
and replaces them with something slightly better.
I think Pathfinder for a while did a really good job of avoiding power creep with new content, but they've started to really go hog wild with the what looks like lateral movement, but in reality is very much power creep. And I think the big one that sticks in me is like the ability score replacement. It's like I can put together this character that uses one ability score for every single thing they do.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's just kind of lame.
I guess that's not something I've really noticed or know exactly what you mean.
There's, I think, a wizard that uses...
The sorcerer that uses intelligence,
Oh,
and you can get an oracle that uses charisma,
yes, I'm familiar with that one.
and then you can multi-class, or you can take a prestige class that uses sorcerer and oracle or whatever, and then you're where normally you would have split stats, you're basically doubling up on it.
Yeah,
and
that is basically part and parcel of the design philosophy of 4th edition that I found so not objectionable, but I was so wishy-washy about it by the time we had more or less abandoned the game. The idea that it's like by design everybody's using their one good stat for everything, their second best stat for some things.
Yeah.
And it's basically a math equation that you can get right every single time by doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Primary stat above everything else. Everything else,
yes.
Whatever is whatever.
And yeah, like an example of the like exactly what we're what it was like with Pathfinder specifically when they came out with, was it the Ultimate Class Guide or something like that? The new book that's coming out with the Slayer in it. That also comes.
Hunter.
It has another it has a class in it that I didn't really pick up on it immediately when Rory told me about it, but when I looked at it, I was like, yeah, these guys do sort of like this class is basically exactly what I would want out of my my wedging duelist into fighter, because they get most of the duelist abilities, a little bit less, but they also like make a lot less weird concessions that I had to make for it, and I'm like, oh man, at the time that was out, obviously, because they're so good at it. But at the same time, like now, of course, I can be like, oh, I'm taking the higher ground. Well, in favor of flavor, but I mean, Duelist does have a certain flavor to it, but at the same time, it sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like when the new content sort of basically replaces what you were going for, and it's like, I could just do this now. I don't know. I guess it just comes down to group discretion as to that sort of stuff. Does that ruin the immersion? Does that not seem as fun now that you don't have to work for it, or how people feel about that sort of stuff, I guess?
Yeah.
Well, in the case of the Paladin one, it was just really disappointing because then you're this class who is literally worse than all the other classes that have come out. Because I think Paladin was the only one that was different in the first book, and then the second book they changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that one didn't seem so extreme until they had come out with like 2 or 3 books with new defender type classes that all were just
really good.
Well, it's not that they were necessarily better or outperforming your paladin. They just didn't have that same restriction.
Yeah.
That didn't really seem to crop up for anybody else.
Exactly, and it's like, do you, in the name of having things like smoothed over, like Jeff said, it's like player discretion. Does anyone care if the paladin gets a do-over because his character is marginalized by their design philosophy, or or do you just sort of look the other way while the character scrubs some numbers out because it sucks for him, or does he just tough it out until his character gets eaten by a dragon and then he makes a different defender?
I remember in a lot of the 4th edition games, what we would do is it'd be like, you got to do over when the new book came out.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to in a system like that, whereas Pathfinder was always kind of like building blocks. Each level you took was another block you stacked on top, and you could take a different type of block if you wanted to, take a different class, buy a different feat. Whereas 4th edition was sort of like, there's kind of like a already built tower, and you could stick some stuff on the sides of it, but it was already more or less going to be the same path from bottom to top.
And that might have been part of it, but I felt a lot of times when we were playing 4 that like a new book came out, and my first reaction is that I wanted my character to die or retire or something because, I've played the other thing, and that's all there is to it, and it's not really going to be much different than that. So you just want to do something else.
I think the biggest problem, the biggest blame that 4th edition had in that regard was the frequent introduction of new races. Because you couldn't multi-race your character partway through. You couldn't rebuild your same character as a different race with very, very few exceptions. Whereas new classes and stuff, you could do like a rebuild or a do-over or something. Even to like a completely different class, like I did with Warlord to Bard. But the racist thing, like, they kept bringing out new ones with every book, and it was like, okay, I guess these seem neat, but after a fashion, I stopped really paying attention to them because I didn't want to, because I knew I wouldn't use them with my current character at all.
Yeah, that's exactly like like with my duelist. Granted, at the moment, it's amusing because the archetype that my character is and the class that he's going into, they fit so perfectly with the character that I wouldn't really want to change it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, like when the new stuff comes out, I sort of have to just sort of put it out of my mind. Like, this isn't even a thing because, we have sort of a crowd-sourcing game balance thing going on in that, and I think that a lot of the stuff, and we had talked about it before, that a lot of the stuff is sort of more powerful, just either because of the way it meshes with other options that are already in the game, or just because of numbers than stuff that's already in the game. I wouldn't want to to be like, oh, well, this new thing came out, and it makes my character way more powerful, you guys. And it would be like, oh, well, like, broaching that subject, everyone seems kind of, when I already have a plan that more or less works for my character anyway. It's like, do I need that? Do I need to ask Jeff, be like, can we make this fit in your world? Like, that seems kind of...
Like, the problem I run into with new content is that I want interesting new stuff to be a thing. It's cool, it's fun, but I don't want to have, like, weird, like, cheater sort of things pop up. Like, Rory's asking me about, like, fireworks and stuff, and I'm like, that's pretty cool. He's playing, like, a modern-ish, for the time, like, alchemist-type character, and that's awesome. If he wants to make that stuff, that's really cool. But it's like, if one of these fireworks has this weird rule in it that I'm not aware of that makes it super crazy, then I don't want to deal with that. I mean, it's just as easily house ruled later, and I guess that's more about managing expectations.
Yeah.
But
right.
It's like, that stuff's easy, but like, I guess bigger things like whole classes and whatnot like that, like the Slayer, for example.
Sure.
Excellent example.
Like, I don't know.
Why isn't this whole army composed of Slayers? It could be. Like, for me, since I tend to work with, pretty limited scope sort of worlds, like the game world that I have that's in, that's like fantasy, is like, I know most of the stuff that's in there. If somebody asks me and they're like, well, can I be this thing? My gut instinct is to say yes, but at the same time, in the back of my mind, I'm going, well, where the hell does that fit? I know where everything else comes from. And I know this world inside and out, and there's no room for that here. Like, there isn't. And I think, like, as much as my gut instinct is to say yes, like if somebody approaches me with something like that, and it's something that's way out there, I mean, I think as we've gotten older, I think it's just more acceptable just to say no.
Yeah, I find myself wishing, and I actually looked for it, that there was some sort of like online crowdsourced thing where people were talking about new content and basically labeling different things as pretty much good to go or overpowered or be careful or stuff like that. And I was hoping to find something like that in the Pathfinder Society thing, but they have very few rules for, unless I was looking in the wrong spot, for content. Pretty much support everything.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that if they're going to publish material for their game that is not appropriate for the organized play, I don't think that they should publish it. I think they should change it before it gets published. And I think that obviously, third-party materials are a different thing, but I would not want a resource like you've described, because I frankly, I'm trying to say this in a diplomatic way that is also interesting. I don't agree with other people about that stuff often.
Sure.
I think it's far too subjective. I think that maybe, a description of something that is over or underpowered and why might be useful, but generally speaking, I think that a lot of people are just like, a lot of those complaints about overpowered things come from groups that are a little bit maybe not less familiar, but more adversarial in their group. Like, they see somebody else hit the ground running with a new ability or item or feat or something, and they're jealous.
Yeah.
Whereas, or if it's like somebody who often games with people who aren't necessarily their core social group, they're gonna have social dynamics that aren't present in every group, and some of those things are gonna involve jealousy or competitiveness.
I think mainly I'm not like a high powered power gaming type, crunch everything out type of player, and it would be awesome if there was some sort of resource where those type of people were betraying their own kind and telling you what to at least keep an eye on. That's
sure.
That would be
Yeah,
nice.
like this is something that we have had problems with in my group before. It turns out that Wandering Star mode it's ridiculously good, and if you see it, you should probably avoid it like the plague. If somebody asks you, just say no.
Yeah, well,
Is this like a group where you're telling other people who don't want to power game not to take this because they would inadvertently be power gaming?
that's the strange utopian idea that Jeff is suggesting.
It is. Jeff and I spent a while talking about that, about whether or not we thought that was there was someplace on the internet like that before the current game that he's running.
Nah.
But it looks too strong.
Everybody knows that you hide those things until you whip them out, and then your GM will take them away if they're too good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have a history of not taking things away, and I feel like we should just do that more often.
I feel like we've seldom had problems with it. But maybe. Can you think of any instances? And I'm afraid this might be getting into some real heady stuff. Any instances where this kind of new material has really damaged or maybe even abruptly ended a game? Or contributed, I guess, would probably be a more realistic way of saying it.
I mean, I
Contributed
think
to the
in
demise.
I can't necessarily and this is just from my personal point of view, but I can say that at least early on in the 4th edition, and also later on in some of the 3.5 stuff, when new material came out, it made me less interested in my character if we were including the new material in the game.
There was it wasn't new material that had came out after the game, but it was, it might have. The one that really comes to my mind that made the game kind of ridiculous was Sean had a giant plant creature that he used from the
Yes.
folio, and he just kind of destroyed everything with its 60-foot reach or whatever it had.
60-foot melee attacks.
And that was interesting, but a lot of stuff in that blew up really hard.
Yeah, and the end of 3.5 sort of got out of control a lot of the time.
I don't think it ends games, because I think the players who benefit from it basically carry the game, and it's just less fun for other people. I recall we played an evil game that went into epic levels, so clearly there wasn't a lot of balance, but myself and I think Rory and we used stuff that was from relatively new and somewhat overpowered books, and then we had like a friend jump in the game, and she rolls up this base book rogue and can't hit anything, can't do any damage, and it's just kind of lame. And it's like that's not her fault, but I don't know if that's really new source material's fault. Maybe that's just an overall game balance problem. But
yeah, I mean, and that could have just been us too. Like it sucks when your character
That
feels
we're not good
marginalized. It could be that we're not good people. That could be a problem with this. But like, I don't know. I mean, I think it's less about game ending and more about character marginalizing.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, I imagine that kind of marginalized feeling has contributed to the stagnation or demise of games in the past.
Like for you, did you feel like in hindsight, did you feel less attachment to your character after you changed him twice?
Not really. That situation was kind of one where I was on the fence about changing him the second time just because I had gotten accustomed to the like mechanics that we were dealing with the changed class, but thematically and ultimately statistically, the change back to Bard was just exactly what I wanted.
Sure.
It was like the way the rules worked played really well, and it didn't really hurt my idea of the character otherwise.
Sure. Call that a success story.
I think
This has
that
mostly
game-
been non-success stories.
I think that game kind of stagnated in large part due to Sean's customary surplus of players.
Yes.
Not that that's a bad thing in every situation, but in that instance, I just felt like a lot of time was spent not playing.
Yeah.
Ultimately, too much.
But like for my money, I mean, when new content comes out, like I've thought about this, because there's always new content for Pathfinder coming out and that sort of thing. And this is where like Fate is perfect, like in a lot of ways for me, because there's never new meaningful content like that. Like it's basically just the same game all the time. But like Pathfinder, it's like, if somebody comes up to me with like, oh hey, this is a new thing that's out in Pathfinder, if I can't rationalize it being in my world easily, then I can just be like, nah.
I think the big thing that we're kind of hitting around is that the new content can increase the difficulties in dealing with problems that are already there. And anytime anything's changing, it just everyone's got to keep an eye out for it and kind of make sure that they're all on board. And if something's too powerful, then it's too powerful. Maybe they don't care, or maybe they do and they don't use it.
Yeah, I think it's good to get a feel for your other players when somebody asks to use new content.
Because there already are unbalanced things in the base game.
Yeah, basically every game it uses numbers. It's hard to find stuff that is that's perfectly balanced.
There already are things in the base game that probably don't fit every single setting that people want to run in, and it's just going to make those problems worse the more and more stuff that comes out that people are excited to use. And but it's not all bad because it's really fun.
Sure.
The only thing I would say is that in some scenarios, I would say that when a new book comes out and it's really strong and it's starting to break the mold, there's that desire to not want to include it. But then towards the end of like a game, like at the end of 3.5, it's kind of broken into its own. Everything is bigger because not only that book is out, but this other book and this other book and this other book are out. Like in 3.0, Savage Species came out kind of towards the middle-ish. And
Dare you bring up Savage Species to me.
like,
Don't you talk about that book.
No one wanted to get anywhere near that. And the complete books were good enough, but then like the complete Scoundrel came out and we're like, no, we're not having any of that. But then we came back and then there's like the complete Scoundrel and then the other ones. And then like the Dragon one or whatever that one was. And all these other ones. And it was like, well, we would have used whatever. this is 3.0 Endgame or whatever it was. So, I don't know.
Well, I think it seems like it's only a problem if not everyone is on the same page. Like if new material comes out that creeps the power, if everyone is into it and gains the hell out of it, they might all have a really good time. It's just if you've got that one player or half the players who just want to focus on playing the game and playing their cool character, then they are going to feel a bit marginalized.
Yeah.
And if everyone is like switching around like thematically what their character is, then that might confuse certain players and they might not buy into it. They might lose immersion. I don't know.
And I guess we have been leaning pretty heavily on like introduction of new mechanical stuff, and particularly games where like class-based or stuff-based games. I think I don't know. This sort of problem seems like it could apply to other types of games, including more narrative ones also. Like I've been thinking obviously a lot of Mage stuff lately, and I think that one thing that they run into is it's not less. They do have some of that mechanical stuff there. Mage the Awakening tends to it often invents new systems for things.
Yes.
For spells that don't really line up statistically with things that exist. I cannot remember the name of the spell from the Silver Ladder book that is like it's thematically supposed to be like a diplomatic immunity thing where you prevent people from attacking you for peaceful reasons, but it functions as like double mage armor plus also people have to make a roll to try to attack you, and it's not anything like anything from any other book. It seemed to me so reasonable at the time because I thought that the idea, the flavor taste was very pleasing to my palate. But the more I looked at it, the more I was just like
how can such a thing exist?
Well, it's one dot level higher than the regular mage armors, and it just does their job infinity % more.
More than one dot level more, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
In games where you can be creative, like in Mage, and if you have the right group in like even a crunchier game, you can still creatively try to do things that aren't necessarily in the rules. I dislike new content when it comes out and starts defining these things that you're already allowing players to do or allowing them to try, and then it's like, oh, well, it turns out you really can't do that, or so-and-so took this ability or has this legacy or whatever, so you really can't do that anymore because that's governed by this rule now. And I don't know.
Yeah, I guess, and that's even on less of like a straight rules definitions thing, I've noticed that a little bit with Mage over the life of the game, like just the certain concepts have kind of evolved without necessarily being asked to. They released a really good book about like astral journeys, but that's something that's not really well defined in the core book at all. And I sort of feel like
vague about that.
Well, I sort of feel like if you had dipped your toe in to that stuff before you read the book, which I did, you will get a lot of stuff that doesn't look anything like the way the writers describe it.
Yeah.
And so you can either try to correct for accuracy or ignore, which I think both are perfectly valid, and I think that I can't imagine a situation where I wouldn't do a little bit of both. But that, and they, of course, published a book for what do you call it, Archmages, that basically, it really does, without commanding you to obey, it tells you all of the secrets of the universe. All of the setting elements of Mage are basically...
I don't think I have enough size in my body for that book.
Well,
throughout the course of my life, I will not have sighed enough times to count the amount of sigh I would need to describe my feelings for that book.
Now, I gotta disclose fully that I do like the book. I think it's good. And I think that it is good whether or not you choose to use anything in it. And I think that it is not, it's not so definitive that it demands that you do acknowledge it until such time as you have to either decide this does exist or it doesn't. And that's blessedly distant at the beginning of any mage game, unless you're starting with archmages.
Well, one thing that I remember from that book, and I don't know if I'm remembering it correctly, was that it always seemed jarring that they would give you they would tell you what you could do with like the 7th through 9th powers, but I don't think they told you it with everything, and it was only like 1 or 2 things. So I didn't really know how I was supposed to get a grasp of what I could and couldn't do, or if these were the only things I could do with these.
Not to go too far afield from what we're actually talking about, they accomplished everything they did in that book by the rule of less is more. The rules for what you can do are essentially, there's like, I don't know, like 4 or 5 new things you can do, which basically cover, here are all of the limits that used to be placed on you, and here is the sequence by which you break them.
Yeah.
And that's fine, but like, I guess even more so than that, the one setting element of Mage, which is so seldom talked about in the early books, and so like temptingly mysterious, is a cosmological destination referred to as the lower depths. And now they have, in all ways, more or less said that the lower depths is the same thing as the hellish realm described in the non-mage book World of Darkness Inferno.
Sure.
Unless you don't want it to be. I think that it's fine, because I think that the fact that it was so ill-defined made it basically, it was kind of a wishy-washy place. It wasn't very interesting, because everything they said about it made it sound like another The Abyss, pretty much. So at least giving it a little bit of pith and gristle.
It's really fun for players to deal with things that are less defined, or to deal with things that you can't go there or you can't do that. Like that sort of stuff, discovering and dealing with that stuff that, who knows, it's kind of up to the GM and what they've kind of figured out, and then a book comes out where it's defined, and I mean, chances
you just
are
have to have the moral fortitude to ignore it.
Yeah, chances are the players aren't going to know, but
yeah, my gut instinct is whenever there is a book, like I tend to rally against books that like additional books that define the fluff, like, or add fluff or change the fluff of a setting, like the mage book that talks about the archmastery and stuff. Like, I'm fine with them defining what you can do with the magic. That doesn't bother me. I think that's pretty cool. But like all the taking away the mystery, sort of like, I hate that.
I'm kind of past that now. That was definitely my opinion about game setting information when I was still a youth. But I'm an old man now, and I like just having that content to consume, and I feel like it makes my imaginings about games yet to be run more vivid.
See, I always think that like for me, I don't like seeing it because I feel like it subtracts from my own creativity on the subject.
Yeah. I don't feel like I have, I don't know, it's not that I don't have that same spark of creativity, it's just that, I don't want to, like, make my own mage universe. I like the one that exists, and I want to use aspects of it. And of course some of them will be discarded wantonly, but some of them I really want to hang on to. Yeah. I don't know, it's a sticky thing. I think that introducing new non-mechanical information is easier in general because you're not really going to get any blowback from players. That's pretty much just a GM concern.
Yeah.
They might, I mean, depending on the type of game, they might want for there to exist a hinted at or described organization or character or item that you just don't want to include, and that's the same kind of struggle as any time your players want something to happen that doesn't happen. It's sort of, I don't feel like we've ever really been in the big habit of saying, what we want to happen in the game, unless that's an element of the game.
That's true.
Like saying, I really hope that this scene resolves this way, so please do that for me. GM's like,
I even have points to spend to that effect.
well, I mean, some games do have mechanics for it, so that's perfectly fine exercise in those situations. But it's just, I mean, for the most part, it's kind of like, wish it in one hand and crap in the other and see which one gets full first. Either way, the game's going to keep going wherever it's going.
Hopefully it's
And
not.
if your
That's
GM
gross.
wants to include things, they can, and if you ask them to, they might.
Yeah. I think that's the best way to think about it. If they want to include things, they can. If you ask, they might. And in my opinion, if you're the GM, cheese it. Throw all the new books in the garbage.
I don't know, it was,
Wow.
burn the books.
Or throw your digital books in the garbage. There's a recycling bin.
Recycle bin, yeah.
I changed my recycling bin to a trash can. I can throw all my books away.
Yeah, get them gigs back, man.
You think that data really does get recycled? Can you throw it in the recycle bin?
I think
Yes.
it kind of does, yeah.
I get to use those
Definitely
bits
does.
and bytes again?
Yeah,
Sure do.
you actually do, yeah.
Well, good. Thanks, guys. You really have given me something to be happy about.
Yay. I'll try to end this one on a happy note.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Does anybody else have anything that they really are itching to say about this hot button issue?
Be careful what you say. We're on a happy note.
No.
I'm not ruining it.
I think we're good.
I have no new source material to ruin this note.
Use
Every puppy will eventually die.
use discretion and don't be a dick, kids.
Yep, That's a
Yay!
good way to do it.
All right.
All right, well, I'm ready to call this one today.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's go get pizza.
Pizza sounds good.
Awesome.
You guys get pizza?
Nope, you don't get
No.
pizza.
Okay. Hooray! No pizza!
Later, all.
See ya.
Bye.